Would you accept that the only way in which there could be no Brexit at all, which is one of the possibilities you have told the House of Commons might come to pass, would be through another vote of the people? Is that the only way you think no Brexit could happen?
There's ways in which some members of the House want to delay Brexit. Brexit, as far as I'm concerned, takes place on the 29th of March 2019. You will have heard from individuals within the House who ask about extending Article 50, that there are people who think the way to avoid Brexit on the 29th of March is to extend Article 50. What I'm saying is that actually what people need to focus on, and what I hope people want to focus on,
right,
is the choice before us of actually ensuring that we deliver on the vote of the British people, but doing it in a way that protects jobs, protects our security, and protects our union.
So extending Article 50 could result in no Brexit at all. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that if you listen to members of the House of Commons, you will hear a variety of views as to what should be happening on this issue. There are those who would be happy to leave without a deal. There are those who wish to leave with a deal. There are those who don't want to leave at all. And within that, there are people who think that perhaps a route is a second referendum. I think that is an attempt to frustrate Brexit. There are those who talk about extending Article 50. I think that is an attempt to frustrate Brexit. I'm focused on delivering on what the British people voted for.
OK. Are you looking at staying in the European Economic Area and a customs union as a potential alternative if your deal is defeated? Is there any internal planning going on in number 10?
As I have made clear, my focus is on the vote that will take place on the 11th of December here in this House.
I think we understand that, Prime Minister.
Yes, but I'm sorry.
But is there any planning going on for that?
What I am focused on and what the government is focused on is the vote that will take place on December the 11th. You want to look at all sorts of options and ideas, sure, and so on and so forth. I think it's important that members of Parliament focus on the nature of this vote. This is an important point in our history. It is a vote on which we will be deciding whether to deliver on the will of the British people. And the good deal that I put forward does that in a way that protects their jobs,
but any
protects their security.
responsible government will be planning in case the deal doesn't go through. And the question I'm asking you is there planning going on for a different approach if the deal is defeated? Because it'd be very strange if you said to us there's no planning going on.
What has been made clear from the European Union and was made clear at the weekend is that this is the deal that has been negotiated, and this is the deal that people need to focus on when they're looking at the vote. OK. The Chancellor also said yesterday that there will be a cost to leaving the European Union because there will be impediments to trade. He's right, isn't he? Well, there will be the question, when this is often put in a variety of ways, this issue about what will happen when we leave the European Union. Obviously, there's analysis that's been provided by the Bank of England, short-term analysis, short-term forecast of what would happen in a no-deal scenario. The government's analysis that was provided to Parliament sets out a number of potential, it looks at different comparisons, no deal, the government's white paper, EEA, and a sort of average free trade agreement. What that looks at is the impact of trade.
We've all read that. One thing, surely, that is clear from that no deal is no longer better than a bad deal, because that would be the worst outcome of all, wouldn't it?
Well, that depends on what a bad deal looks like, I suggest. But obviously the impact of no deal has been forecast at the request of the Treasury Select Committee by the Bank of England. If you look at the issues that have been raised by this analysis, what they show is that the deal that we have negotiated is the best deal for jobs and the economy, which honours the referendum and enables us to take the opportunities post-Brexit.
Is there a worse deal than no deal?
Well, the deal we've negotiated is certainly not that. It's a good deal.
No, but you just said that no deal might not be the worst outcome because there could be an even worse one. What could that be?
Well, there isn't a deal on the table that is in that category.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming now to Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much, Prime Minister, for coming to give evidence to us this morning. Following on from what Hilary Benn said, and given the analysis both by the bank and by the government yesterday on how catastrophic a no deal would be, and I know that the Prime Minister takes her responsibilities to our country very seriously, will therefore the Prime Minister rule out that whatever happens in the vote on the 11th of December, that her government would consider leaving the European Union without a deal?
Well, we will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. And when we come to the vote on the 11th of December, it will be for parliamentarians and members of Parliament to determine whether they want to deliver on the vote that the British people took, whether they want to do that with a good deal which actually does protect people's jobs into the future. That is, we are promoting a good deal.
But that, with respect, Prime Minister, that wasn't my question. I'm asking whether you will rule out the possibility that on the 29th of March we could leave the European Union without a deal. Given what we know now from the Bank of England, from your government's own analysis, will you rule that out as a possibility? It would be so catastrophic.
The decision that the House of Commons will take on the 11th of December, it will be whether to support, whether to ratify the deal that the United Kingdom government has negotiated with the European Union.
If Parliament...
If the House votes down that deal at that point, then there will be some steps that will be necessary, because obviously we've been doing no-deal planning as a government. We've made certain information available to businesses, but at a point at which if the House were to vote down the deal that has been agreed, given that the European Union has been clear that this is the deal that has been agreed and this is the deal that is on the table, then obviously decisions would have to be taken in relation to the action that would need to be taken.
So if Parliament voted down the deal on the 11th of December, would you really, Prime Minister, given what we now know from the analysis, contemplate taking Britain out of the European Union on the 29th of March without a deal, without your deal, without any deal?
If Parliament votes down the deal on the 11th of December, there is then a process, as you know, that is in the legislation for the length of time given for government to come back and make a statement about the next steps. But the timetable is such that actually some people would need to take some practical steps in relation to no deal if the Parliament were to vote down the deal on the 11th of December.
OK, let's turn now to your deal. It's disappointing, Prime Minister, that your deal, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, were not modelled in the government's own analysis, and instead the analysis is on the July White Paper rather than your deal. Why was that, Prime Minister? Is it because, frankly, there is insufficient detail in the political declaration to model it at all?
As you know, the political declaration sets a spectrum in relation to the balance of rights and obligations of access to the market versus acceptance of rules, which has obviously an impact on checks at the border. What we have done, that is, and the detail of that is being negotiated. It is still open for frictionless trade. What I have said in the House of Commons is that, and I've been honest with people, we haven't persuaded everybody in Europe yet about absolutely frictionless trade. The ambition is there to be as near frictionless in the political declaration, to be as near frictionless as possible. What we did do, we thought it was right to do, was to set out the sensitivity analysis of that spectrum. And we took a midpoint on that spectrum, which is the 50% sensitivity analysis, which has been identified. And I think if you look at some of the comments that have been given about the analysis that the government has put forward, for example, the chief economist of the IFG has been clear that they set tests that we needed to address to ensure MPs and others were able to scrutinise the modelling and interpret it appropriately. And those tests, the published report passes those tests and is something that should be taken seriously.
But given that in July the White Paper had in it frictionless trade, and as you just said, Prime Minister, the political declaration wasn't able to achieve that objective, can we assume that the outcome of the political declaration without frictionless trade will be a worse economic outcome than what was in the July White Paper?
What the analysis has shown is a 50% sensitivity point. There's a spectrum in relation to that analysis, which of course, goes alongside the spectrum of checks versus access to the markets. But it is not the case, it is still the government's position that we will be negotiating to achieve frictionless trade. What you see in the political declaration, and you'll see it in the language around the ambition for ambitious customs arrangements in the future, is a clear recognition of the need to reduce that friction as much as possible. I think it's still better to reduce it to have frictionless trade. But as I say, there are those in the European Union who have yet to be persuaded of that argument.
I think the European Union are very much in favour of frictionless trade. That's why they're in the single market and the customs union, Prime Minister. You said yesterday in Prime Minister's questions that the analysis does not show that we will be poorer in the future, but the government analysis published yesterday shows that we will be £100 billion a year as a country worse off, £1,100 per person per year. So can you confirm that under all scenarios analysed by the government analysis, we will be poorer in the future compared with our current position in the European Union?
Yes.
That's what the government analysis shows, isn't it, Prime Minister?
Can I explain why what I said in the Prime Minister's questions and why I made that point? I think if you went out to a member of the public and said we're going to be poorer outside the European Union than inside the European than we are today, they poorer outside the EU, they assume you mean poorer than today. Actually, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is the economy will continue to grow. We will be better off in the future. The question is about the relative rates of growth in the different models that are identified. The point is that being inside the European Union is not an option.
Mm-hmm. But you say you can confirm,
what we have to look at is what is the best option outside the European Union, because people have voted to leave the EU. And what the analysis shows is that the best option outside the European Union, which obviously delivers on the vote by being outside the EU, but is also the best for jobs and the economy, is the government's approach.
I understand all that, Prime Minister, but can you confirm that under all scenarios modelled by the government, we will be poorer in the future compared with our current relationship with the European Union? Yes or no?
What the analysis shows is that there will be an impact on the growth, on the rate of growth in the United Kingdom, looking ahead. Other things being equal, but of course,
and that impact
other things
will be negative.
But other things will not necessarily be equal. This is why I made a slightly, what some might require as record as a slightly flip comment about forecasts and economic forecasts in response to a question and statement, I think on Monday or last week. But the point is that there are many variables that can change, that will impact in relation to what happens to our economy outside the European Union. Some of those are in our hands and decisions that we will be taking as a government. Obviously, there are other aspects in terms of the international trade. In 2020, 90% of the growth growth is due to be outside the European Union.
Yes, but that is all modelled with respect, Prime Minister, in the government.
No, it's not all. No, it's not all modelled.
The trade assumptions about the growth in the rest of the world is modelled, and the trade assumptions are in the government's analysis. The government's analysis show under all scenarios we will be poorer compared with our current relationship. That is what the government analysis shows.
Can I just be clear? The government analysis does not deal with all the issues that I've spoken about, because it doesn't deal with decisions that government might take.
It includes trade, Prime Minister.
It can't.
It assumes that we come to trade deals with the United States, Australia,
yes,
New Zealand and other countries, so that trade assumptions are in the government analysis, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Meg Hillier.
Prime Minister, you have said that austerity is coming to an end, but all the economic analysis shows there will be less government income when we leave. So how are you going to end austerity?
Well, we're already showing how we end austerity. We're showing how we end austerity in the budget. We're showing how we end austerity by the extra money
Prime Minister,
we'll be putting in the National Health Service.
That's now, but I'm saying when we leave, there's going to be less money, and yet you've said austerity is coming to an end. There's a 20 billion going into the NHS, for example, but there's a lot of other demands, as my committee highlights routinely. How are you going to end austerity with the financial challenges we'll have when we leave?
What we are going to do in terms of ending austerity is ensure that we are able to continue to deal with our debt and see our debt falling, and put more money into public services. We will be doing that as our economy grows into the future, as the economy will continue to grow into the future.
But Prime Minister, Prime Minister, but you've said in response to Rachel Reeves, the economy will grow at a lower rate in your view, on the basis of this economic analysis. So there's less money coming in. So will you be raising taxes or increasing debt?
No, the economic analysis shows the trade impact, and that trade impact shows the impact on the rate of growth in the future. Other things being equal, other things, of course, will not necessarily be equal in terms of government decisions and so forth. So that's why I say that you have to be very careful when you quote the analysis in looking at exactly what it is. But if you look at in the spending review next year, we will be setting out the spending path and plans for the government over the next 3 years when we are outside the European Union. Now, there are many aspects that will go into that. There are also many issues. I mean, I could point out to you, not in answer to your question, but I could point out to a separate point that the Bank of England analysis actually shows that our deal does have that sort of deal dividend.
Well, the Bank of England analysis, as Mark Carney has said, was in the worst recession since the 30s. So there will be less money coming in. The spending review...
No, the Bank of England analysis is in no deal situation.
Yes, well, that's one of the options that's out there, as the Chair highlighted. We have a very rocky vote coming up in the next 13 days. So given where we are at now, given that the spending review could be will be the first post-Brexit spending set-up for the government, there will be less money available under any analysis, especially if we crash out. How are you going to end austerity? Was that spending review going to be a cuts round?
You will. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the spending review is going to have in it before the spending review is.
But you have
brought
two.
up.
But Prime Minister, you have two options. You could raise taxes, or you could increase debt.
No.
They're the simple options. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to it, but in simple terms.
There is a lot more to it, with due respect, and I think you understand that there's a lot more to it, and those are not. And let's just look at some of the circumstances. Back in the summer, when we announced the money into the National Health Service, we spoke. I mean, there is the money that we will no longer be paying into the European Union, but we also spoke about the fact that at that stage we thought we might need to ask people to contribute more through taxes into the money that we're putting in the National Health Service. What we then saw in the budget is that we have been able to show how we fund that National Health Service increase without actually asking people to raise taxes. So this is why I'm saying these aren't absolutes that either you do this or you do Y or you do X. There are many variables in this.
We get a lot of smoke and mirrors from your ministers about how government finances is going. But today we hear that the Met Police, and certainly experience of mine in my constituency, are not investigating a third of all crimes. We've had, through my committee, we see routinely real challenges in the public services. So if austerity is over, you're going to have to fund that somehow. We're going to have less money coming in after Brexit. So what's the plan?
And you will see how we will be funding our public services over the next 3 years when we announce the spending review.
Right. Well, and on the withdrawal agreement, as my colleague has highlighted, that hasn't been properly modelled yet. Is there other plans to have some modelling of that before Parliament, before the vote?
The withdrawal agreement?
The plan, the withdrawal agreement. And the political agreement.
You mean the political declaration?
Sorry, yes.
These are two separate.
Yes, sorry. Yes. I mean the political declaration.
Yes, the political declaration sets out the spectrum.
I know what it says,
I've been clear about what the government will be aiming to achieve.
But the government across an analysis looked at different options, but not the option that's before us. That's the point.
There is a spectrum.
So will you be doing that?
There is a spectrum that is identified in the political declaration. We will be negotiating in relation to the rights and obligations, access to market versus checks that will be necessary. What we have done in the analysis, and I think it's entirely right and proper, and that is accepted by external bodies. We have put the sensitivity analysis so that people can have some idea of the impact of the variation of where we appear on that spectrum. The aim of the political declaration, the clear intent of the political declaration, is to be as low down that spectrum as possible. I will continue to argue for it to be frictionless.
Okay. Is there any more information going to be coming to Parliament before the vote about the economic impacts of Brexit on the basis of the deal that you've struck?
We have provided the economic analysis.
We'd say it doesn't go far. Can I just move on to the preparedness of government? My committee has produced 9 unanimous reports in the last year looking at government preparedness. And there's a real concern that the very best outcome is suboptimal, especially if we crash out without a deal. So what are you going to be doing to make sure that there is proper support for business and taxpayers generally to deal with the outfall of Brexit, given that we have shown, demonstrably shown, that government departments aren't going to be ready in time?
Well, government departments are, as you know, the Treasury has put made money available to government departments to deal with both preparing for a deal and preparing for no deal. That's entirely right and proper. All those arrangements.
Well, we know the money's there.
made.
But they haven't. They acknowledge. Many of your civil servants have acknowledged that it's suboptimal. That they're not going to be able to deliver everything perfectly on the 29th of March. Do you agree with that?
Well, on the 29th of March, if we agree the withdrawal agreement, of course, what we will be doing is saying we'll be leaving the European Union, but the implementation period will give us that period of time when we'll be continuing to be operating much as today, and therefore the issue, I think you're questioning, is no deal preparations. If we come out on the 29th of March without a deal, what would the preparations be? As I've just made clear, of course, there will be some key decisions to be taken depending on the outcome of the vote on the 11th of December.